Today's interview is part of a series of videos by the Campaign Against Criminalizing Communities, or CAMPAC, including with supporters of the campaign and those who can contribute to the wider discussion of excessive securitization of our societies and the misuse of terror and other legislation to suppress dissent and movements for self-determination. The campaign brings together human rights activists, lawyers, journalists, and communities which find themselves targeted by so-called anti-terror legislation. CAMPAC was formed by local communities and human rights groups in 2001 in response to the banning of 21 organizations under powers granted by the UK Terrorism Act 2000. Kurdish, Baluch, Tamil, Basque, Sudanese, and Kashmiri communities all came together to form CAMPAC as an umbrella group, together with organizations including the Haldane Society for Socialist Lawyers, State Watch, the Institute for Race Relations, Campaign Against Arms Trade, and the civil liberties firm Bernberg Pierce. CAMPAC organizes public meetings, petitions, parliamentary lobbies, submissions to parliamentary bodies, as well as protests at court hearings and prisons. Information on CAMPAC's history, research, publication, and events can be found at campac.org.uk, as well as at peaceinkurdistancampaign.com. Our guest today is Igor Zulaika, the International Relations and Policy Representative of Bildu, the left-wing pro-independence Basque coalition. Before assuming his current position, Igor represented Bildu at the European Parliament in Brussels for 4 years. Igor started his political involvement as part of the students and youth movement in Spain and has held various responsibilities in the international groups of pro-independence Basque parties over the years, most notably with the Basque Socialist Party Sortu and Bildu. Igor, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
So, Igor, many people will not be aware that the Spanish Constitution recognizes 3 separate historic nationalities and semi-autonomous regions in Catalonia, Galicia, and Basque. Catalonia, Galicia, and Basque are also their own distinct languages, Basque being the most distinct with no linguistic connection to other European languages. Can you very briefly describe what the Basque country is and its legal and political relationship to the rest of Spain?
So the Basque country is a denied nation. We live both sides of the Pyrenees in France, under French rule and Spanish rule, so not only in Spain. Today, we are divided in several different administrations. So on the one hand, in the north part, under French rule, there is the Northern Basque country, and then in the Spanish state, we are divided in 2 main bodies, the Basque Autonomous Community and the Foral Community of Navarre. So we would recognize 7 historical Basque provinces, 4 of them in the Spanish state and 3 of them under the French rule. In the Spanish side, what we have is since 1978, we have a recognition of nationalities in the Spanish Constitution. It doesn't say which are nationalities, so it just says regions and nationalities, but it doesn't make the list. So it doesn't say Galicia, the Catalan countries, or the Basque country. It says there exist nationalities. And what happened in 1978 was that there was a decision on the following years to divide the Basque Autonomous Community and Navarre, so as to avoid us having one single administrative body. Nowadays, these 2 autonomies, the Basque Autonomous Community and the Foral Community of Navarre, hold wide powers, both in terms of taxing, self-legislation, and others. We have our own police forces, for example, but we don't control either borders or our external relations, and whatever we do is submitted then or can be submitted then to the Spanish Constitutional Court that would take away or just act as a referee, saying what's too much for an autonomous community to do and what's behind inside their own powers.
Okay, thank you. And then can you, once again, very briefly, tell us about the history of the Basque independence movement? I mean, what exactly does independence mean to the various Basque movements and political parties that have sought independence?
It's quite a wide question. The Basque independence movement as such started back in the end of the 19th century with a Christian Democrat man who defined the Basque National Party. He was a man of his time, and he's been accused now of being racist and other things, which may be true, but that happened on their... Sorry, I will start again, not trying to get in problems myself with the Basque National Party. So it's a wide question. The Basque pro-independence movement starts formally and in modern era at the end of the 19th century with the foundation of the Basque National Party by Sabino Arana. Sabino Arana is a Christian Democrat of his time, and soon after that, there is a progressive split on the ideas he starts posing in for the Basque nation to be independent. So, 1936, when the Spanish Civil War starts, we already have two Basque pro-independence movements. One of them is the Christian Democrat Basque National Party. The other one is ANB, Basque National Action, which is progressive. And under Franco's regime, what we have is a generation of people that gets fed up with the PNB's non-strategy to deal with the dictatorship, and starts a new organization that will end up being called DTA in 1959. This group of young people decides that they need to do something against the dictatorship, opposed to the lack of action by PNB. And this gives rise to 100, maybe not 100, but scores of organizations, of civil society organizations, or of even armed organizations that will create in the following 20 years what we know now as the pro-independence left movement. That has trade unions, has ecological organizations, youth movement, political parties, and so on. And nowadays, what means the pro-independence left in current terms? What we speak about is a historical bloc of people to the left of what the Basque National Party represents that serves a willingness for more sovereignty and more progressive policies for this country. And inside that bloc, you can find people who comes from communist or anarchist traditions to social democrats, and all together form what we now call Euskal Herria Bildu, which would be a federation of political parties that includes individuals as members.
Okay, so as you know, Igor, CAMPAC was formed to challenge the UK Terrorism Act 2000 and all those other pieces of legislation, other terror legislation that followed, on the basis that such laws aren't necessary or even useful in preventing terrorism or prosecuting acts of terrorism, with the additional critique that the terrorism laws in this country and elsewhere have been used to undermine political dissent and crush movements, including peaceful movements for self-determination. How have terrorism laws been historically used in Spain to target independence movements, especially in the Basque Country?
So at the end of the 90s, starting 1995, 1996, the Spanish government decided to apply a wide anti-terrorist policy. That meant they decided that everything to the left and everything which was progressive in the Basque Country or pro-independence was part of ETA. And so this is a strategy that looks easy to understand. What they said was, anything that serves common objective of independence and socialism with ETA acts on ETA's orders and therefore is a terrorist organization. And that meant that over 15 years, hundreds of people were arrested and sent to prison under terrorist charges for their political activism, for their journalism, for actions that in the rest of Europe wouldn't have been considered acts of terrorism, but of political freedom. This process of widening what terrorism meant was brought so far as to have a crime of glorification of terrorism that allows prosecutors to take people to court just on cases on which they believe there was a willingness to defamate victims of terrorism or to make them feel their pain again. And so freedom of speech was curtailed, and this kind of laws allowed for a big control of public speech and of public activism, as if someone would make statements in favor of independence or socialism, those could be considered as part of the campaign of ETA for those things, and therefore that people could be charged and criminalized.
But glorifying terrorism or glorifying terrorist acts is also a crime which was prescribed in the UK and which, as you've noted, can be interpreted very widely. To what extent have you seen or have terrorism laws in Spain been able to successfully weaken or undermine even just solidarity with movements for self-determination or protest movements in Spain, even if they were non-violent in their rhetoric?
Well, the offense of glorification of terrorism, and not only the specific case of that offense, but mainly the ambience it created. It allowed for police officers to take anyone on charges and allow them to repress people, and allow them quite a big deal of freedom when facing activist communities and so on. So it's been quite useful for them. We always say that resisting is important, but resisting is resisting. And when you are resisting repression, then you are not working towards your own objectives, and therefore you are not winning. So it's important to resist and must be done, but that there is a need for us to overcome that repression and be able to build up and get to our objectives. When it comes to what the anti-terrorist offensive was able to do in the Basque Country, you should be looking at the years between 2007 and 2009, on which, under the excuse of anti-terrorism laws and glorification and terrorism and others, several scores of Basque youth activists were either forced to flee their homes or were sent into prison. Only between November 2009 and October 2010, I think it was over 150 youth activists that were either taken to court and jail or who were forced to flee their homes. So that did have an impact in the movement and in solidarity movements with the movement itself.
So ETA, the most well-known Basque independence movement or organization seeking Basque independence, which you mentioned, ETA, engaged in armed resistance against Spain's fascist dictatorship in the 1960s, but it declared an end to its armed activities in 2011 and formally disbanded in 2018. What is the situation today regarding the use of terror and other laws to clamp down on political activism and independence movements in Catalonia and the Basque Country? For example, has the human rights of people in the Basque Country improved since ETA ceased its armed activities and disbanded?
So this is a really complicated question that would need several minutes to explain, but long story short, what we can say is that after the end of ETA's armed campaign, the group of people that has been accused of terrorist offenses has decreased a lot. There is still an ongoing repression by certain sectors of the Spanish judiciary against pro-independence activists and who are trying to find all offenses to charge people with. But in general terms, there has been a reduction in the use of the terrorist laws, anti-terrorist laws. They exist still, they are there, so it's part of the toolbox of Spanish repressors. For the moment, they want to use them, but they are not using them. And there could be two readings of this. One of them is no, but there is no more use of these codes because there is no more violence and so on. And the other is that at a certain point, a Basque society was so fed up with the attacks against political activists that the cost of using those anti-terror laws was too high for the Spanish repressors to keep using them, because no one in the Basque Country understood the use of anti-terrorist law in a context on which there was no use of violence by part of ETA. And so that with the years, they have been forced to decrease their use, not because they didn't want to use them, but because there was no ambience that would tolerate the use of such laws in the Basque Country nowadays.
So just to expand on that, when somebody is charged, say by the Spanish state, and say they're from and live in the Basque Country, and they're charged under anti-terror laws, for example, or other security laws, where is the court where they're prosecuted? Is it a Basque judge? Is it a Basque court? Or is it in a federal court belonging to the Spanish nation as a whole?
So in the case of offenses related to terrorism in the Spanish state, there is no natural judge. So all the offenses related to terrorism are dealt with by a special national court, it's the Audiencia Nacional. This is a court that comes from the Franquist regime. And when I mean it comes from it, it's that I think it's the night of the 3rd October 1978 or 79. This was a criminal court, a tribunal de orden público, so the public order tribunal of Franco's regime. And the next day, it became the Audiencia Nacional. And when I mean the next day, it really, so from the 3rd October to the 4th October, overnight, the same building, the same judges, the same prosecutors stopped being a repressive tool of Franco's regime and became a repressive tool of the Spanish democracy. The same judges, the same prosecutors. So when someone is charged with offenses related to terrorism in the Spanish state, this special court in Madrid takes over precedence for those cases. Even today, Basque prisoners, when they do have a right to parole or they are released on any condition or they have a permit to go out, depend on the judge that sits on that court in Madrid.
Okay, and on that point, are there still people that you would consider to be political prisoners in Spain, including Basque? If so, who are they?
Well, there is still 150 people who are part of the Basque Political Prisoners Collective. These are people who was accused of several offenses, from street rioting to being activists or members of ETA, to political activists or journalists. And these people have served really long sentences already, and they are nowadays, all of them are imprisoned in the Basque Autonomous Community. For long years, they have been dispersed through all of the Spanish state, all the Spanish geography, so that they would be isolated amongst themselves and from their families. So for long years, they would be even in the same prison in different wings, so that they wouldn't have contact with each other. And nowadays, these 150 people they are back in the Basque country, but they are still political prisoners, and we are still demanding for their release.
And what has been the justification of the Spanish state to keep these people imprisoned, especially given that ETA has disbanded, the ETA had disbanded?
So these prisoners are held under special codes of law. They are held under, most of them under the 2003-7 law in the Spanish state, but other laws too, that make them special prisoners. So up until now, no parole conditions were granted to them, no permits were given to them, and now they have started to get access to some of those. The Spanish authorities say, they are just applying the law, but those are laws that were especially designed to keep these people out of the application of ordinary code of law. So if a prisoner serves 3/4 of their sentence, in normal terms, they become eligible for parole. So effectively, really little people serve their whole sentence in the Spanish state, but Basque prisoners serve their whole sentences in as much as possible for the Spanish authorities to make sure they serve. So the situation for these people is really complicated, and it's still an issue in the Basque country, because even though ETA stopped its armed campaign over 12 years now, these 150 comrades are still in prison, are still being served by the harshest possible Spanish code of law. So they are still having issues to get their access to paroles, permits, and other rights. Spanish writing would always say that we are asking for these people to be granted special conditions, and what we are only asking at this stage is for them to serve as any other person would and have access to the same rights.